but in the quiet moments between words, there was understanding, and that understanding was the beginning of trust. As night fell and the stars emerged, Ethan stepped outside for a moment, looking at the sky. Clara joined him, her hand resting on his arm. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, patient. The night was calm, the air crisp, and the world seemed to hold its breath with them. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that maybe, just maybe, life had brought him exactly what he needed, not in the way he expected, but in a way that could change everything. In the days that followed, Ethan continued his work on the ranch, and Clara found ways to involve herself despite her limitations. She learned to manage small tasks, keep records, and even guide Ethan through decisions about the land. They began to form a rhythm together, each discovering that companionship was not about grand gestures, but about patience, understanding, and respect. And though the townspeople still whispered and chuckled behind closed doors, Ethan and Clara were beginning a life that was their own, untouched by the cruelty of others. For Ethan, the joke that was meant to humiliate him had instead opened a door to something deeper than he had ever imagined. And for Clara, a life she had feared would be lonely and limited was now filled with the possibility of trust, love, and partnership. The journey had only begun, but the first step had been taken, and it was a step neither of them would ever forget. Ethan had hoped that the arrival of Clara at his ranch would mark the beginning of a calm, quiet life together, but reality came faster than he expected. From the moment they returned to the ranch, the challenges of daily life became clear. The wide fields, steep paths, and uneven ground, which were nothing to Ethan, were now obstacles to Clara. The ranch, which had always felt like freedom to him, suddenly seemed complicated and intimidating. She had been paralyzed from the waist down after her accident, and though her spirit was strong, her body could not keep up with the demands of the land. At first, Ethan was unsure how to manage. He had grown up learning to work independently, to rely on his hands and strength, to ride, to lift, to carry. Now, every task needed to be adjusted. He had to think twice before leading Clara anywhere, making sure her wheelchair could roll safely or that she would not be left struggling. He found himself questioning how he could protect her without smothering her independence. Each day brought new challenges, but Ethan refused to see them as burdens. Instead, he treated them as puzzles he could solve, a way to show Clara that she was not alone, that she was valued and respected. Clara, meanwhile, struggled with her own emotions. She had grown accustomed to a life of independence before her accident, and suddenly being reliant on someone else was both humbling and frightening. She had feared judgment from everyone around her, and at first she believed that Ethan might feel the same disappointment that so many others had. But as she watched him carefully adjust the paths, help her into the wagon, and treat her with respect rather than pity, her suspicion began to fade. There was something steady in him, a quiet patience that did not demand anything from her but offered everything. The townspeople, however, did not share Ethan's perspective. Rumors spread quickly that he had been given a bride as a joke, and that the match would not last more than a few days. Some people whispered that Ethan must feel humiliated. Others said Clara would soon return to town, tired of life on the ranch, frustrated by its hard work and isolation. But Ethan did not pay attention to their words. He had faced loneliness for years, and their opinions mattered little to him. What mattered was Clara's comfort, her confidence, and her willingness to face the days ahead together. The first weeks were the hardest. Ethan had to make adjustments around the ranch. He widened pathways, added sturdy ramps to buildings, and built special seating areas where Clara could watch the fields without strain. Every evening he would sit with her and talk through the day, asking what had been difficult and how he could help. Sometimes he would simply listen as she spoke about her fears, her memories, and the frustrations of her condition. Clara, in turn, began to trust him more with each passing day. She realized that his kindness was not temporary, that it was not born from sympathy or obligation, but from a genuine desire to share life with her. Despite the work, Ethan never lost his sense of humor. He would make small jokes about the challenges they faced, laughing when he tried to lift a hay bale too high or when a stubborn mule refused to follow directions. Phew! Clara would laugh too, softly at first, and then more freely as she recognized that laughter did not diminish her situation but made it easier to face. They began to form a rhythm together, learning each other's strengths and limits. Where Ethan had muscles and endurance, Clara had insight and intelligence. Together, they began to see ways to manage the ranch that neither could have achieved alone. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and golden in the sky, Ethan noticed Clara staring quietly at the distant hills. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes reflecting both longing and sadness. "Est." He wheeled closer to her, not speaking at first, just sitting beside her. "Do you ever feel trapped?" she asked softly, almost as if she feared the answer. Ethan shook his head gently. "No," he said. "I feel alive here. And I think you can too. You just need time to see it the same way." Clara's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and doubt. She had heard similar words from others before, but none had meant them with sincerity. Ethan's tone, his calmness, his willingness to work for her rather than demand from her, was different. Slowly, she began to believe that perhaps life could still hold beauty for her, even in this new, unexpected way. The first major test came when a spring storm rolled in. The wind whipped across the fields, and rain began to pour in heavy sheets. Ethan and Clara had to secure the animals, cover supplies, and ensure the safety of the property. Patient. Clara feared for her ability to help, worried that she might slow Ethan down or get in the way, but Ethan insisted she remain close and involved. He gave her tasks that she could manage safely, organizing supplies, checking fences from a higher vantage point, keeping track of the animals' movements. By the end of the storm, they were exhausted, but a new respect had grown between them. Clara realized that she could contribute meaningfully to the ranch despite her limitations, and Ethan recognized her determination and courage. Neither spoke of the storm as a test, but it had been one, and they had passed together. The townspeople continued to watch, some incredulous that Ethan had not abandoned the situation, others slowly intrigued by the unusual partnership. Word spread that the so-called paralyzed bride was not merely surviving on the ranch, she was thriving. She learned to manage certain daily tasks with skill, organizing schedules, keeping records, and even learning some basic ranch management under Ethan's guidance. The people who had expected failure were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Ethan, for his part, had never thought of himself as heroic. He had only wanted to live a life with purpose and honesty. But in helping Clara navigate the new challenges, he discovered something deeper within himself. A patience, a resilience, and a capacity for love that went beyond mere affection. He did not see her as someone in need of rescue, but as a partner, someone to support, encourage, and grow with. Clara, too, began to see the value in the life that she had once feared would be limited and lonely. The land, the animals, and the open sky, which had once seemed overwhelming, now felt inviting. She found satisfaction in the small victories, maneuvering her wheelchair through a newly built ramp, organizing the feed for the animals, or successfully guiding Ethan through a task that had previously been difficult. Each day brought a sense of accomplishment, and with it, a growing confidence. There were moments of doubt, of course, but Clara sometimes felt the sting of old fears, wondering if she truly belonged here or if the townspeople's cruel intentions would someday come to light again. But every time doubt crept in, Ethan was there, calm, patient, unwavering. His quiet reassurance did not erase the challenges, but it made them manageable, and it made her feel less alone than she had in years. Over time, the two began to discover a deeper connection. They shared quiet evenings watching the sunset, discussing memories of the past and hopes for the future. They laughed together over small mishaps on the ranch, comforted each other during difficult tasks, and learned to read each other's unspoken thoughts. The bond they formed was subtle, slow-growing and real, built not on grand gestures or romantic cliches, but on patience, trust, and mutual respect. By the end of the season, the ranch had transformed in small but significant ways. Paths were smoother, buildings were more accessible, and the rhythm of life had adapted to include Clara fully. The work was still hard and the challenges remained, but for the first time both of them felt that they were not just surviving, they were living. The once cruel joke of the townspeople had lost its power. What they had intended as embarrassment had instead revealed the strength and resilience of both Ethan and Clara. The days grew warmer and the fields greened with the new growth of spring. Clara and Ethan continued to work side by side, learning from one another, supporting one another, and slowly but surely discovering the possibilities that life had not seemed to offer before. It was not a perfect life. There were still obstacles, still fears, but it was a life they faced together. And in facing it together, they found something stronger than loneliness, stronger than fear, a quiet, unwavering hope that no one could take away. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, but with the passing of time, new challenges began to surface. Ethan and Clara had grown accustomed to working together, yet the simplicity of their days often gave way to difficulties that tested both their patience and their resolve. Even with ramps, wider paths, and adjusted routines, the ranch still demanded physical effort, clever problem-solving, and careful planning. There were days when Clara felt that she was holding Ethan back, and days when Ethan worried that he could not do enough to make her comfortable. It was during one particularly hot summer that the struggle reached its peak. The cattle had begun to scatter across the far fields after a sudden thunderstorm had frightened them. Ethan rode swiftly, trying to round them up, while Clara, confined to the wheelchair, could only watch anxiously from the barnyard. She felt useless, frustrated and angry at herself. She had hoped to contribute, to feel needed, yet in that moment, all she could do was wait.
Ethan, however, refused to see her as a burden.
"Clara," he called, his voice steady, "I need your eyes here. Watch the far fence and tell me if any cattle try to sneak past. I can't see everything at once." Clara took a deep breath and obeyed. Using her keen observation and quick thinking, she guided Ethan toward the stray cattle, shouting directions across the fields. Ethan followed her instructions, moving the animals steadily back toward the corral. Clara realized in that moment that even though her body was limited, her mind and spirit were not. She had skills, insight, and courage that mattered. The incident gave her confidence, but it also revealed how challenging life on the ranch could truly be. Nights were often long and exhausting. They had to check the fences, feed the animals, and repair any damage caused by storms or accidents. Sometimes Ethan would lift heavy bales of hay or push wagons while Clara supervised. Other times, she would organize equipment, keep records of supplies, or carefully guide Ethan's decisions about planting and harvesting. Every day was a combination of physical labor, strategic thinking, and teamwork, and neither of them had the luxury of rest until the day's work was done. Even more difficult were the moments of emotional strain. Clara had days when the memory of her accident haunted her. She would recall the freedom she once had, the ability to run, to walk, to climb hills with ease, and feel a sharp pang of loss. On those days, her frustration sometimes turned inward. She felt trapped in a body that could no longer do the things she once took for granted. She feared becoming a burden on Ethan, afraid that the man who had treated her with such kindness might one day tire of the work, the constant care and the adjustments her presence required. Ethan, of course, never showed signs of impatience. He noticed her growing quiet on such days and would sit beside her, gently holding her hand. "You're not a burden, Clara," he said softly. "You never have been, and you never will be. We face this together. Every day, the good and the hard. That's what partners do." His words were steady, sincere, and carried the weight of experience. He had faced loneliness and hardship himself, and he understood that life required patience, understanding, and courage. There were also moments when the townspeople's cruel joke lingered in their minds. Some whispered behind Ethan and Clara's backs, imagining that the couple would fail. The idea of the paralyzed bride and the lonely cowboy had been meant to humiliate, to entertain at someone else's expense. Ethan and Clara did not let those words control their lives, but their echoes were hard to ignore. On certain evenings, Clara would glance at the distant town and feel the sting of judgment, the fear that people would always see her as weak or incomplete. She had grown used to the pitying glances, the whispers, and the jokes, yet they still hurt. But in those moments of fear or doubt, Ethan's presence was steady. He treated every day as an opportunity, not a test. When Clara hesitated, he encouraged her gently. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength. He did not solve every problem for her, nor did he pretend that difficulties did not exist. Instead, he faced them alongside her, showing that resilience was not about going alone, but about standing together. One particular day tested both of them more than ever. A new foal had been born among the horses, and it was fragile, barely able to stand. The mother horse was nervous, moving restlessly and threatening to step on the baby. Clara watched anxiously as Ethan approached, trying to calm the mother and guide the foal. She wanted to help but was limited to her wheelchair. Her hands trembled as she leaned forward, wishing she could do more. Ethan looked at her and smiled reassuringly. "Bay, you can help by watching the foal and calling out if the mother moves too close. Your voice matters." Clara realized he trusted her judgment. She focused, giving precise instructions and noticing the smallest movements. The foal stabilized, and the mother calmed, largely thanks to Clara's clear and careful guidance. Ethan lifted her wheelchair slightly so she could get a better view. That small act made her feel included, important, and respected. Beck. She realized that contribution was not always physical. Intelligence, awareness, and courage were just as vital. Despite these victories, challenges continued. There were days when supplies ran low, when fences broke in unexpected ways, or when the weather made even simple tasks impossible. On such days, Clara felt frustration bubbling within her. She hated needing help, hated feeling like she slowed things down. But Ethan never allowed those feelings to become shameful. He encouraged her to speak openly, to express her fears, and to trust that they were facing life together. Slowly, Clara began to develop new strengths. She learned to maneuver her wheelchair over uneven ground, using her upper body and strategy to navigate slopes and ramps. She discovered small tricks to organize tasks, to make chores more efficient, and to assist Ethan without straining herself. Ethan, in turn, learned more about her limits and abilities, constantly adjusting the environment to make it safer and more inclusive. Together, they adapted to the realities of life, turning obstacles into opportunities to grow closer. The emotional bond between them deepened with each challenge. They laughed at minor mishaps, shared quiet moments under the stars, and celebrated even the smallest victories. Clara realized that her life was no longer defined by what she could not do, but by what she could achieve with Ethan's support. She felt a sense of freedom she had not anticipated, the freedom of being valued, trusted, and respected. However, the struggle was not only about tasks and obstacles. It was about acceptance, patience, and trust. Clara had to accept that her life had changed, that she could not return to the past, and that progress would come slowly. Ethan had to trust that her spirit would remain strong, that her courage could match his own. And both had to accept that life on the ranch would always demand effort, creativity, and resilience. They had to choose every day to face difficulties together rather than separately. Through it all, the town continued to watch. Some were incredulous that Ethan had not abandoned Clara as they had expected. Others were intrigued, quietly impressed by the partnership they observed. Patience. Slowly, their story began to challenge the assumptions of the community. People started to see Clara not as a victim, not as an object of ridicule, but as a woman of intelligence, determination, and courage. Ethan's steadfastness also became evident, and whispers of mockery were replaced by murmurs of admiration. By the end of the summer, Clara and Ethan had survived storms, physical obstacles, and emotional challenges. They had learned that life was not always fair, that judgment from others could be cruel, and that setbacks were inevitable. Yet, they had also discovered something more valuable, a partnership built on trust, respect, and patience. They had faced struggle together and come out stronger, more united, and more confident in their ability to manage the ranch, the world, and life itself. As the sun set over the hills one warm evening, Clara watched Ethan work with the cattle, guiding them into the corral with skill and patience. She smiled, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude. The joke that had been intended to humiliate had instead created an opportunity for growth, connection, and understandings. She realized that life was not about avoiding challenges but about facing them with courage and support. And in Ethan, she had found a partner who would never let her face them alone. That night, under the open sky filled with stars, Clara and Ethan sat together, exhausted but fulfilled. They had faced struggles that would have daunted many, yet they had learned that together they could overcome almost anything. Every day brought new challenges, but it also brought new victories, new laughter, and new trust. And as they looked out over the fields, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch at night, they both understood that the hardest part of life was not the labor or the obstacles. It was believing in oneself and in each other, enough to face them. As autumn arrived, the ranch transformed along with the season. The fields turned golden, the air grew crisp, and the days became shorter, yet there was a renewed energy in both Ethan and Clara. After months of struggle, trial, and adjustment, something in their partnership had shifted. They were no longer simply surviving life on the ranch. They were beginning to thrive. Their earlier difficulties had become lessons, teaching them patience, resilience, and creativity. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the barn windows, Ethan and Clara worked together in a way that felt seamless. Ethan lifted bales of hay with ease, while Clara organized the feed schedules and recorded the details of each animal's health and care. She had developed her own system, carefully tracking everything from feed amounts to veterinary needs. Her organization impressed Ethan more than words could express. He had always appreciated her intelligence and calm presence, but now he saw her potential not as a helper or assistant, but as a true partner. Clara noticed the change as well. The wheelchair that had once felt like a limitation now felt like a tool of empowerment. She had learned to navigate the uneven terrain of the ranch with precision, using her strength and ingenuity to move independently in ways that surprised even her. With Ethan's encouragement, she began to take on tasks she had never thought possible, guiding the horses during feeding, assisting with the care of the newborn foals, and even managing small groups of cattle during the more complicated chores. Every success strengthened her confidence and her sense of purpose. The breakthrough, however, came in a moment neither of them could have anticipated. One afternoon, a young boy from the town, no older than 10, wandered onto the ranch. His family had recently moved into the area, and he had heard stories about the paralyzed bride and the kind cowboy who had welcomed her. The boy was shy, but his curiosity was evident as he watched Clara maneuver her wheelchair along the barnyard. He hesitated, then approached her slowly. "Can you show me how you do that?" he asked softly, pointing to the way she had guided the horses. Clara looked at him, surprised, then smiled. For the first time she realized that her presence on the ranch could inspire others. She guided the boy patiently, explaining how to move safely, how to observe the animals' behavior, and how to anticipate their needs. Ethan watched quietly from a distance, pride swelling in his chest. The boy's mother soon followed, thanking Ethan and Clara for teaching her son. "I've never seen someone handle life with so much patience and courage," she said. "He looks up to you both already." Clara felt a warmth she had never experienced before, a sense that her life, once limited by her physical condition, could have a meaningful impact on others. It was a moment of clarity. She realized that her challenges had given her a unique perspective, one that could help others navigate their own struggles. From that day on, Clara began to see the ranch not as a place of limitation, but as a space of opportunity. She and Ethan started to make small changes that allowed others to learn and grow alongside them. They created safer pathways, added benches and shaded areas for rest, and began teaching basic skills to local children who visited. The ranch became a place of learning and inspiration, a living example of how patience, teamwork, and kindness could overcome obstacles. The transformation was not only physical but emotional as well. Clara's spirit, once weighed down by fear and self-doubt, now shone brightly. She laughed more freely, engaged with the animals confidently, and even found joy in tasks that had once seemed impossible. She discovered a talent for planning and management skills she had never fully explored before, and realized that her contribution was valued not despite her disability, but because of the unique perspective it brought. Ethan, too, experienced his own transformation. The quiet patience that had always been a part of him grew deeper as he worked alongside Clara. He learned to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow stronger together. The ranch, once a place of solitude, became a place of shared purpose. Every task, from feeding the cattle to repairing fences, was an opportunity to strengthen their partnership. Ethan realized that love was not only in grand gestures, but in consistent support, respect, and belief in one another's abilities. One day, a particularly ambitious project arose. Ethan had always dreamed of building a small greenhouse to grow vegetables and herbs for the ranch, but the task seemed overwhelming given the physical limitations of Clara's mobility. Yet, together they approached it with creativity and determination. Ethan handled the heavy construction, while Clara designed the layout, organized materials, and managed the project timeline. The greenhouse began to take shape, and with each plank nailed and each seed planted, their confidence grew. The greenhouse became a symbol of their transformation. It represented not just their labor, but their ability to overcome limitations, to innovate, and to succeed together. Visitors who came to the ranch noticed the structure and were inspired by its purpose. It showed that challenges could be met with creativity and collaboration, and that obstacles could become opportunities for growth. Clara's face would light up with pride as she walked through the greenhouse, her hands tracing the carefully planted rows of vegetables and herbs, knowing that she had contributed meaningfully to every step. As autumn deepened, Ethan and Clara found time for moments of quiet reflection. They would sit on the porch in the early evening watching the sun sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold, orange, and violet. The world seemed calm, and yet full of possibilities. In those moments, Clara often spoke of the future, not with fear, but with hope. She spoke of expanding the ranch's influence, teaching more children and finding new ways to contribute to the community. Ethan listened, encouraged, and helped turn her visions into reality. The townspeople began to notice a profound change. The couple who had been the subject of ridicule now inspired admiration. Parents brought their children to the ranch, eager for them to learn from Clara's courage and Ethan's unwavering support. Neighbors stopped by to observe, ask questions, and even seek advice for their own farms. The cruel joke that had once been a source of embarrassment became irrelevant, replaced by genuine respect and appreciation. Ethan and Clara had risen above the expectation of failure and transformed it into a story of triumph and inspiration. Yes, even with the breakthrough, life was not without its challenges. Winter approached, bringing shorter days, colder nights, and the need for careful preparation. Ethan and Clara faced the practical realities of snow, frozen ground, and the increased workload that winter demanded. Yet they approached it with the same resilience and teamwork that had carried them through summer. Each task, from stacking firewood to feeding the animals in freezing weather, was undertaken together, their combined efforts demonstrating their unbreakable partnership. By the end of the season, Ethan and Clara had reached a level of harmony and achievement that neither could have imagined at the beginning of the year. The ranch, once a simple, solitary place, had become a thriving environment of learning, growth, and mutual support. But Clara had discovered her strengths. Ethan had discovered new depths of patience and leadership, and together they had transformed not only their own lives but the perception of the entire community. The breakthrough was complete. What had begun as a life of challenge, limitation, and misunderstanding had become a life of opportunity, trust, and fulfillment. Clara no longer felt defined by her physical condition. She felt empowered by her knowledge, her courage, and her partnership with Ethan. Ethan no longer felt alone. He felt enriched by the shared journey, strengthened by the mutual respect. On a cool autumn evening, as the two walked, or, in Clara's case, wheeled, through the fields, the full weight of their achievement was clear. The ranch was prepared for the winter, the animals were safe and well cared for, and the greenhouse stood as a testament to their perseverance. But beyond these tangible successes, the true triumph was in the bond they had forged. They had faced struggle, adapted to change, and discovered that strength, courage, and love were not measured by circumstance, but by the way they confronted life together. Ethan looked at Clara, her eyes reflecting the setting sun, and felt a quiet pride swell within him. Clara looked at Ethan, seeing not only a companion but a steadfast partner who had never doubted her, never mocked her, and never allowed the world's cruelty to define her worth. Together they had not only survived, they had flourished. From that day forward, every challenge they faced was met with the knowledge that they had already overcome so much. Every task, every hardship, and every unexpected obstacle became an opportunity to strengthen their bond, grow their skills, and inspire others. Life on the ranch was no longer a test of endurance. It was a celebration of partnership, courage, and the power of belief in one another. And so, with the autumn winds rustling through the fields and the golden light casting warmth across the land, Ethan and Clara stood together, not as a man and a paralyzed bride, but as equals, partners, and friends who had discovered the true meaning of resilience. Their breakthrough had come not from luck or circumstance, but from patience, trust, and unwavering dedication to one another. And in that breakthrough they found not only freedom and fulfillment, but the promise of a future built together, strong and unshakable. The years passed, and life on the ranch grew steadier, richer, and more fulfilling for both Ethan and Clara. The hardships of their early days together had become stories of perseverance, lessons they carried with pride rather than burden. But every morning the sun rose over the fields, golden light spilling across the barn, the fences, and the wide open sky, reminding them of how far they had come. The ranch, once a place of struggle and adjustment, had become a sanctuary of possibility, growth, and harmony. Clara moved with ease now through the ranch, her wheelchair no longer a limitation but a tool that allowed her to navigate the land with confidence. She had learned to anticipate the needs of the animals, to manage the schedule of the ranch, and to contribute in ways that complemented Ethan's physical strength. Her mind was sharp, her spirit strong, and her confidence unshakable. Bah. She took pride in the small victories, the way the chickens followed their routine, the success of the foals she helped guide, or the flourishing vegetables in the greenhouse she had helped design. Every achievement, no matter how small, reminded her of her own resilience and determination. Ethan, too, had grown alongside Clara. He had learned to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth. His patience had deepened, his understanding had broadened, and his appreciation for Clara's insight had strengthened the bond between them. No longer did he view the ranch as simply a place of work. It had become a canvas for collaboration, learning, and joy. Together they had built something more than a home. They had created a life full of purpose, meaning, and mutual respect. The townspeople, who had once mocked and doubted them, had begun to notice the change. Word spread of the remarkable partnership between the cowboy and his bride. People came to visit the ranch, not to judge, but to learn, to be inspired, and to witness the strength that came from dedication and trust. Children watched Clara with wide eyes, amazed at her courage and resourcefulness. Parents asked questions about how Ethan and Clara managed the ranch together, hoping to take some of their wisdom into their own lives. The couple had become a quiet source of inspiration, proof that challenges could be met and overcome with patience, kindness, and determination. One particularly beautiful morning, Clara and Ethan were tending to the fields when a group of local children arrived. They had heard stories about the cowboy and his brave bride, and wanted to see the ranch for themselves. Clara welcomed them warmly, showing them how to care for the animals, organize supplies, and even plant seeds in the greenhouse. The children were eager to learn, and Ethan demonstrated how to handle the livestock carefully, making sure everyone stayed safe. Clara's confidence and clarity impressed the children, while Ethan's strength and calm guidance inspired respect. By the end of the morning, the group had learned valuable skills, but more importantly, they had learned about courage, partnership, and perseverance. Clara reflected on how much her life had changed. She thought of the fear she had once carried, the uncertainty, and the loneliness that had seemed so permanent.
Life had not been easy, and she had faced moments of frustration, doubt, and pain.
Yet she had survived and flourished, not because life had become easier, but because she had been supported by someone who believed in her, who respected her, and who walked beside her every step of the way. She realized that true strength did not come from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with courage and love. Ethan, watching Clara work with the children, felt a quiet pride. He remembered the day she had first arrived at the ranch, the uncertainty in her eyes and the fear in her voice. He had wondered how he could help her, how he could support her, and whether life together could ever be smooth. Now, years later, he saw the transformation, not only in Clara, but in himself. He had grown more patient, more empathetic, and more capable of seeing beyond physical limitations to the heart and mind of the person he loved, Bay. Together, they had achieved something extraordinary, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Their success was not just personal, it had ripple effects throughout the community. Neighbors who had once doubted them now sought advice on how to manage challenges in their own lives. Children who had witnessed Clara's courage learned the value of perseverance, kindness, and teamwork. The ranch had become a place of hope and learning, where obstacles were not feared but faced, where success was measured not by wealth or fame but by growth, understanding, and mutual support. Despite the admiration and respect they received, Clara and Ethan remained humble. They did not boast about their achievements, nor did they seek recognition. They focused instead on the daily joys of ranch life, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, and the deep connection they shared. Their love had grown steadily, rooted in trust, shared challenges, and respect for one another's abilities. It was a love that had been tested by difficulty and strengthened by perseverance. As winter approached, the ranch became a place of preparation and reflection. Snow blanketed the fields, and the animals required extra care. But Ethan and Clara worked side by side, ensuring that the horses had shelter, the cattle were fed, and the greenhouse was protected from frost. Clara had become adept at managing the logistics, while Ethan handled the heavy lifting. Together they moved with a sense of purpose and harmony that was inspiring to watch. Their teamwork was seamless, a testament to the months and years of learning, adaptation, and growth. One evening after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the snow fall gently across the fields. Clara rested her hand on Ethan's arm, feeling warmth and comfort in his steady presence. They spoke quietly of the journey they had taken together, the struggles, the breakthroughs, and the triumphs. They laughed at memories of early mistakes and mishaps on the ranch, recalling moments that had once seemed impossible but were now part of their shared story. Clara reflected on how far she had come. She had once feared a life of limitation and isolation, but now she saw that her circumstances had given her strength, wisdom, and courage. She realized that her value was not defined by what she could or could not do physically, but by the choices she made, the effort she put forth, and the heart she brought to every challenge. Ethan had shown her that true partnership was about seeing one another as equals, respecting each other's abilities, and believing in one another even when the world doubted. Ethan, in turn, reflected on the gift of having Clara in his life. Despot. She had brought perspective, patience, and insight that had enriched every part of the ranch. She had taught him that strength was not only physical, but emotional and intellectual. He had learned the value of empathy, the importance of encouraging others, and the joy that comes from shared accomplishment. Together, they had turned what had begun as a cruel joke into a story of resilience, love, and inspiration. Breaths. Their days continued with the rhythm of the ranch, yet each day carried meaning beyond work. They celebrated small victories, whether it was a foal taking its first steps, a successful harvest from the greenhouse. Every achievement reminded them of their journey, the challenges they had overcome, and the growth they had experienced together. Life was no longer defined by difficulty, but by the opportunities to learn, to help, and to thrive. The pace. The seasons changed again, and spring returned with new growth and promise. Ethan and Clara welcomed visitors, shared their knowledge, and continued to nurture the ranch as a place of learning and inspiration. Clara often guided young visitors, showing them how to care for animals and manage the land. Ethan demonstrated the importance of strength and responsibility, but together they modeled a partnership built on respect, teamwork, and courage. Clara sometimes thought back to the day she had first arrived at the ranch, frightened, uncertain, and unsure of her place. She had feared rejection, isolation, and disappointment. But now she realized that those fears had been replaced by confidence, respect, and love. Life had given her a new beginning, not because the world had been kind, but because she had found someone who believed in her and stood by her through every challenge. Ethan looked at Clara, seeing the determination, courage, and grace in her eyes. He understood that their journey had been about more than love. It had been about growth, trust, and the power of partnership. They had faced difficulties that could have separated them, but instead those challenges had strengthened their bond and given them purpose. Together they had built a life that was not only full of love, but also meaningful, inspiring, and enduring. Bask, as the sun set over the hills, casting golden light across the ranch, Ethan and Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their journey had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had led to a life of purpose, partnership, and joy. They had risen above doubt, fear, and hardship, not simply surviving but thriving together. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a testament to resilience, determination, and love. They had learned that true happiness did not come from an easy life, but from facing challenges together and supporting one another through every trial. They had discovered that strength could take many forms: physical, emotional, and intellectual, and that the most powerful strength came from working together, trusting one another, and believing in one another's abilities. In the quiet of the evening, with stars beginning to twinkle overhead, Ethan and Clara sat together in contentment. The journey that had begun with uncertainty, struggle, and fear had transformed into a story of triumph, inspiration, and lasting impact. They had faced life's challenges not as individuals but as partners, and in doing so they had discovered the true meaning of love, resilience, and purpose. The ranch, the animals, the greenhouse, and the fields were all symbols of their hard work and dedication. But more than that, they were symbols of the bond between Ethan and Clara, a bond that could withstand difficulty, nurture growth, and inspire those who witnessed it. Their story had begun as a cruel joke, but it had ended as a testament to courage, partnership, and the beauty of believing in one another. And so, as the night settled over the hills, Ethan and Clara looked at each other with quiet pride and gratitude. They had found a life far richer than they had imagined, filled not only with love and companionship, but with purpose, growth, and the knowledge that together they could overcome anything. The world outside the ranch could whisper, laugh, or doubt, but it no longer mattered. They had created their own story, one of hope, resilience, and enduring partnership, a story that would continue to inspire for years to come.